Loudoun County, from horseback to train, Canal River to the early development of cars, all the way to modern transportation in Loudoun County.
For over the last 258 years since the establishment of this county, transportation has profoundly changed across the vast lands of small county farms to large modernized towns since 1757. In this short documentary, we will be exploring how transportation has changed in Loudoun County, Virginia, for over the course of history.
In the late 1700s, transportation here was known to be on horseback, and for those with wealth, had the pleasure of horse-pulled carriages. Today, some people take cars for granted. Just imagine how different it must have been before our time. Soon after, though, the Virginia Assembly made a law that all new roads had to most appropriately lead to churches, courthouses, and be convenient to easily travel from one county to the next. During the early 1700s, native tribes used a famous walkway which is known today as Route 15. The war party of Lenape traveled all the way from their homeland of New Jersey in hopes to reach South Carolina to attack their enemy. However, was stopped by the Catawba people by the Potomac River, where a historic battle had taken place between the two conflicting tribes. European settlement began here in the late 1730s, where they would claim large plantations for farming. Soon the Virginia Assembly will eventually demand the claim of present-day Leesburg with over 60 acres of land. During the War of 1812, Leesburg served as a temporary haven for the United States government as an archive, housing the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and famous portraits as they were forced to flee from Washington, D.C. for protection. Early in the American Civil War, Leesburg was the site of the Battle of Ball's Bluff, a Confederate victory. The battlefield is marked by one of America's smallest cemeteries. Today, Leesburg continues to serve as the center of the government and commerce for Loudoun County. The town's historic district was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1970 and cited as one of the best preserved and most prestigious downtowns in Virginia. It was here in Leesburg, Virginia, where the unfolding birth of Loudoun County from Fairfax was going to take place, where over the next 25 decades, transportation was going to get a huge upgrade with technological advances.
Leesburg, Virginia, 1830. The Goose Creek Canal, officially known as the C&O Canal, had its beginnings in 1830, when investors met at the Old Pier Hotel in Leesburg to discuss the idea. They needed to raise about $40,000, with the state funding the remaining 60%, which was normal for Virginia for all private-public transportation partnerships of that era. It took the investors 9 years to raise their part of the money, partly because of a mid-1830s depression, also the uneasiness about railroads, which threatened to replace canals as a major form of transportation between Loudoun and the East Coast seaport. In 1837, their fears came to fruition when the B&O railroad's further extensions opened to Frederick and Point of Rock on the Potomac River. A connection with the Winchester and Potomac Railroad opened at Harper's Ferry, consequently surpassing the C&O Canal as the fastest and more efficient way of travel and hauling supplies. In 1828, the B&O Railroad is one of the oldest railroads in the United States. It was created not only to transport goods to merchants, but to compete with the Erie Canal and along with several other canals that would connect Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. The B&O Railroad crosses over in West Virginia to Maryland, over where the Shenandoah and Potomac River crosses into each other. The B&O earned its motto of linking 13 states by means of train. Construction had begun on July 4th in 1828. Later, by 1843, Congress had approved and paid an estimate of $30,000 to construct one of the first telegraph lines in America along the railroad, stretching from Washington, D.C. all the way to Baltimore. To further our technological advances, the first car in America was introduced by the Boschke family in 1894, known as the first 5-seater sedan. The project was undertaken by the Boschke brothers, Louis and Albert. The design was experimental, and no one was sure if it would work, but sure enough it did, reaching top speeds of 23.5 miles per hour.
Purcellville, Virginia, 1912. The railroad, serving people all around the world for hundreds of years. Reliable, dependable, and efficient. All of these terms can be used to describe this large transportation system. Constructed in 1828, the B&O Railroad is one of the oldest railroads in the United States. B&O is short for Baltimore and Ohio Road. The railroad received its name from its starting point. It was intended to reach the Ohio River. It was created not only to transport goods to merchants, but to compete with the Erie Canal and along with several other canals that would connect Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. The railroad was also used during the Civil War to transport war supplies to both sides of the war, the Union and the Confederates. After the war, the train returned to its normal functions of transportation. By the conclusion of the 1970s, the railroad covered a vast land area covering over 10,000 miles of track. With that area of coverage, canals and horseback were left in the dust, unable to compete with the reliability and efficiency of the coal-powered locomotive. While they were considered obsolete, the railroads also ran into problems of their own. During their early development stages, they were way too heavy to be operable for the country's needs. Determined to change this, one Peter Cooper managed to get the locomotive up to a speed of 15 miles per hour, while hauling a cart of 30 people. This was such a historic breakthrough, it motivated more and more thinkers to try and improve the locomotive even more. The year was 1912 that the occupation of the Old Dominion and Washington Railroad would come into the vast picture, known today as the W&OD Trail. The W&OD Railroad stretched from downtown Purcellville all the way to Shirlington just outside of Washington, D.C. However, by 1968, after surviving the Great Depression, the railroad suffered severe financial struggle due to the Long Depression and eventually went bankrupt. Unable to recover from the loss, it was later to be paved as we know it today. The history of aviation extends over 2,000 years, although mankind's interest with it goes back even further. From kites to tower jumping, many attempts of flight have been recorded throughout history. Although early flight attempts were unsuccessful, it was mankind's curiosity of the subject that later on brought us hot air balloons, blimps, planes, and jets. By the time the United States got involved in World War I, it was here that an American fighter pilot landed in the grassy field, known at the time as George's Field. Later, by the 1920s, for a small fee, pilots would fly you for an overview of early Loudoun County and the Potomac River. This grassy field is known today as the Leesburg Executive Airport, serving over 300 private corporation jets and planes.
Today, in modern-day Loudoun County, we live among 50 towns, all relying on transportation 24/7 around the clock to continue the success of this grand community. Leesburg, like the rest of Loudoun, has undergone considerable growth and development over the last 30 years, transforming from a small, rural Piedmont town to a suburban community for commuters to the national capital. From the highways to back roads, wheat fields to rivers, Loudoun County continues to thrive and advance today, as it has for over the last 258 years.